Okay, that's great. Right, okay, so Saya, have you got anything else to add before we make a start?
No, just welcome everyone. It's great to have you here.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, so in this presentation we're going to cover several topics. So first of all, I'm going to give you an expanded insight into just how wonderful the New Forest wetlands are in comparison with the national picture. However, the local picture is not entirely a bed of roses. There are challenges that the forest faces, and these challenges are growing in an ever-changing world. And finally, I want to highlight some of the work that Freshwater Habitats Trust and the Catchment Partnership are doing to address some of these issues at a catchment scale, and Saya will be mainly looking at some of the work that we're doing and showcasing that to you. So let me just give you a little bit of background about Freshwater Habitats Trust, FHT, as we call ourselves. We are a national organisation and we are based in Oxford. We work across England and some parts of Wales, all the way from the Lizard in Cornwall up to the borders of Scotland. And our overarching aim is to protect freshwater life. And we do this in several ways. We pride ourselves in being evidence-based with a very strong scientific grounding. We are highly strategic, so we target our work where evidence suggests it will be most effective. And being concerned with all freshwaters, including those that are small and most often than not undervalued. And these are habitats such as headwater streams, ponds, flushes, ditches, really the small stuff. And lastly, we work in partnership with people and communities, organisations and businesses to achieve the best results for freshwater wildlife. So to start with, let's just begin by defining what a wetland actually is. So wetlands are areas where water covers the soil or is present either at or near the surface of the soil all year round or for varying periods during the year. And there are two general categories. So wetlands are either coastal and tidal. So wetlands, saltwater habitats are classed as wetlands, and those kind of tidal habitats coming back from those coastal waters. And wetlands are classed as inland or non-tidal habitats. And this is really important to think about in the New Forest, as the catchment is so closely connected to the sea. So in a very short distance, the streams and the rivers run very quickly from the headwaters, which is the source, all the way down to the coast. So what happens upstream certainly impacts downstream. So I've got a few pretty pictures for you now. So a few images just to remind ourselves of the varying wetland habitats that we have here in the New Forest. We are very lucky, we have such a wide variety. So I'm just going to go into some of the broad habitat types. So we have valley mires. These valley mires are actually waterlogged deep peat in valley bottoms. There are about 90 sites across the forest. So this is an extensive system with some of the best examples in Europe. And well, I'm going to talk about them a little bit more later. So we have ponds. I'm sure you've all come across ponds in the New Forest, and this includes temporary ponds or ephemeral ponds as we call them. The New Forest is an exceptional pondscape. There are over 1,000 recorded ponds. As some years ago, FHT had a flagship pond project and identified 200 ponds in the UK of exceptional quality, and over 40 of these sites are located in the New Forest. And these are sites that support one or more ponds of exceptional quality. So basically that means that they're rich in biodiversity. So just to give you another example of the scale of wonderfulness of our ponds in the New Forest, out of the 4,800 recorded ponds in the UK, there are several ponds in the New Forest that make the top 5. So it really is a magnificent landscape for ponds. What makes a pond is the size, so from anything from 1 square metre to 2 hectares, which holds water for 4 months of the year or more, is classed as a pond. Okay, so moving on to trackway, ditches and pools. These are tiny habitats, but they can contain some of the UK's most rarest plants. And as a visitor to the New Forest, you wouldn't necessarily know that you've trodden on something like yellow century or coral necklace, which is two incredibly rare species, but they do exist on trackways and next to the trackways, which is evident just here where this pony is grazing. Headwater streams sometimes don't look like very much, but these are the very source of the river, which is the top of the catchment. Sometimes don't look like a stream. And some of these streams in the forest are actually ephemeral in nature, like our ponds, so they temporarily hold water. And there are species associated with these ephemeral streams, which are unique and with limited distribution across England and Wales. Species like the scarce summer and scarce purple mayfly and rare beetle populations, amongst others. So yeah, really important part of the New Forest landscape. We also have restored streams, so organisations such as the Environment Agency and Forestry England have been restoring streams now for over the past 20 years. To varying degrees of success, but this stream here has been transformed from a steep-sided bank covered with bramble, now almost doubled in size over the restoration area, and is now a slow-flowing stream spilling across the floodplain, and now has priority species that have colonised across the multitude of microhabitats that have been created. So such a real important transformation. So there are 2 notable lakes in the New Forest, Hatchet Pond, which is a lake, and Sowley Pond. These lakes are actually monitored by the Environment Agency in Natural England, and unfortunately, currently, both are failing to meet good status and are actually failing water bodies due to nutrient enrichment or eutrophication and other human impacts. So just for reference, a lake is a body of water which is over 2 hectares in size. Okay, so the New Forest is made up of 12 major rivers, which obviously have many streams and their tributaries, which flow either south or east from the core of the forest outward into the Solent or the Southampton Water. Some of these rivers are the Lymington, the Bewley, the Bartley, to name but a few, names that you'll recognise there. And all of these rivers are monitored by the Environment Agency. So it's really important to acknowledge the extensive coastal habitats which form part of the New Forest wetland network. There are coastal mudflats, saline lagoons, salt marshes, shingle banks. They're all habitats with equally important designations as the inland wetlands, and include Special Area of Conservation designation, SPA, which is the Special Protected Areas for birds. And the whole area is incredibly important for wading birds, overwintering birds, and ground nesting birds, which are completely dependent upon the complex saline and freshwater habitats that surround the coastline of the New Forest. So let's look at the global headline. So globally, about 10% of all species are found in freshwater, of which only covers about 3% of the land surface. And there are thought to be as many species in freshwater as there are in the sea, which occupies 70% of the earth. So this really tells us that freshwater plays a vital role in species diversity globally. So here in the UK, we have large amounts of freshwater due to our climate and our geology. And as a leading charity for freshwater conservation in England and Wales, Freshwater Habitats Trust have been working hard in the background and have identified 24 nationally important freshwater landscapes. And the evidence that we've used to identify these areas or these landscapes has been through national species data sets or species records. And the New Forest has more rare species records per kilometre grid square than any other important freshwater landscape in the country. So that's all of those green blobs that you can see there on the map. So this really makes the New Forest one of the few remaining high quality freshwater landscapes in England. That's why it's given local, national and international conservation status. It supports critical freshwater species and habitats. And these species really have disappeared from almost every other landscape in the UK. So I hope that kind of really brings it home just how important the New Forest is. And of course, really important to acknowledge the Dorset Heaths are included within that landscape as well. So let's just have a closer look at the New Forest catchment. So the catchment covers about 300 square kilometres. So the New Forest catchment area has to align with the Environment Agency's catchment boundaries. Of course, these boundaries are all aren't really there. They are imposed by our statutory organisations. And for the purpose of our work, we do focus on the areas that are in colour on this map here. However, the national park and the designated landscape continues up to the north and to the west over to the Avon Valley. So to tackle this boundary challenge, we do work closely with our partners who have a proactive remit in those catchments to the north and the west. And our work includes these catchments where it can. And the Environment Agency have recognised the importance of working around the forest fringe and the benefits that brings to the New Forest catchment and the neighbouring catchments. So, in a nutshell, the New Forest supports the highest percentage of SSSI land cover than any other national park in England. Over 35% of the UK's freshwater invertebrates. That's about 400 species. Over 65% of the UK's wetland plants, that's about 300 species. And 75% of England's critically endangered pond species. And with nearly 300 hectares of wet heath and valley mire, which makes the New Forest the largest area of valley bog in Europe. So some really nice stats there about the New Forest. So let's have a little glance. We've looked at the habitats, but let's have a glance at some of the extraordinary species that we have in the forest that are so completely dependent upon water. So I'm going to pick a few out here. So let's have a little look at medicinal leech, which is this species here, you can see. So it's the largest leech found in the UK. And it's got these, this photograph doesn't really do it justice. When you see them actually in the wild, they have these beautiful yellow and red stripes along their upper side. They can grow up to about 20 centimetres, which was quite astounding. And they really favour habitats such as shallow ponds that dry right down during the summer. And those shallow waters help to ensure that the higher temperatures which they need at about 25 degrees for breeding. So it's really important that they can find these really shallow ponds that are nice and warm. So the medicinal leech only exists in ponds actually that are grazed. and we all know that the New Forest is grazed by livestock. And grazing provides both food and controls the vegetation, but not too intense, as this requires, dense stands of long-leaved marginal vegetation, because that's where they make their cocoons in which they lay their eggs. So the grazing in the New Forest is the perfect place really for these species, because you get this really nice mix of vegetation height around ponds. So they have a sucker at the back, which is used to move around, and they have a sucker at the front, which contains the jaw, which is used for feeding. And they actually have 3 jaws within that, with around about 100 teeth. So they feed on almost anything, including fish, birds, and mammals, but their favoured meal is amphibians. Medicinal leech, they were once widespread, but unfortunately we've seen dramatic decline as a result of over-exploitation for medicinal purposes. But not only this, changes in land use are another significant reason for their decline, including wetland drainage and loss of grazing. And at one point, ivermectin was a real problem, which is a worming treatment for animals and livestock, which was also another contributor to their decline, but not so much anymore. So let's have a little look now at great crested newts. So we have all 3 native species in the forest. We have smooth newt, palmate newts, and great crested newts. Great crested newts are one of the most protected species in Europe. Great crested newts actually only use ponds during their breeding season. The rest of the year they feed on invertebrates in hedgerows, woodland, tussocky grasslands. So actually the habitat surrounding the pond is just as important as the pond itself. They're often referred to as dinosaur-like in appearance, or they're known as the warty newt. They hibernate underground among tree roots and in old walls. And the UK's population of great crested newt are actually internationally important, and Freshwater Habitats Trust are the organisation that carry out the annual monitoring of this species across the country on behalf of Natural England. So really important species. So we'll go for a plant now. So this is pillwort up here. Doesn't look as interesting in this photograph as it does in real, but pillwort is actually our only native aquatic fern, and it's very thread-like leaves which unfurl from tight coils, very similar to a fern, of course. It's a priority species, and it's declining rapidly around the country. The UK hold a substantial proportion of the global population, and it thrives in the New Forest. It's not a good competitor. It needs grazing pressure and it needs clean water. That's another really interesting species and a really good indicator for fantastic quality habitat. Okay, I'm just going to get rid of my little pointer. Okay, there we go. So there are also some magnificent species along the coastline water, and one of the reasons this is because it's very warm, it's very sheltered, and more often than not it makes the perfect maternal ground for species, fish species such as stingray. We've also got another important fish species, the migratory European eel, which is a species that lives both in fresh and coastal water. It's a protected species, and the young swim from the Sargasso Sea, where they're born, each year, and they spend their growing years in the New Forest water bodies. Then, once they're fully matured adults, they then return back to the Sargasso Sea, which is in the North Atlantic. So, an incredible species that we have in the New Forest. And let's not forget the internationally important wading and ground nesting birds that are dependent on the wetland habitats. The curlew in the New Forest alone holds 10% of lowland England's breeding population. And really this is due to the large tracts of connected landscape that can actually sustain such a population. The coastline again is really important. There are more than 15 species of wading bird, including redshank, golden plover and oystercatcher. You know, and those new forest shallow coastal waters are really important for feeding grounds for these birds. So we're still discovering new species in the new forest. One of the UK's top bee and fly specialists has discovered a new species of British wasp a couple of years ago in a new forest wetland, and this wasp nests in galls on common reed, which grows in valley mires, so that's quite exciting. So let's just zone in on a specific place, a place where many rarities can be found in the same area. So this is Hatchet Pond. This is in fact a man-made lake that has seen an exceptional array of biodiversity develop here over the past 200 years. In fact, Hatchet Pond was really the very reason that the New Forest was designated as a triple SI. So let's just have a little look at the statistics, just to give you a flavour. So in total, 133 wetland plants have been recorded at Hatchet. So this is more than a third of all wetland plants found in the UK. We find them here at Hatchet Pond. And on one single visit, 58 wetland plant species were recorded. The average for the high quality UK lakes is just 36, so smashes another record there. And it supports 11 uncommon plant species. The total number of uncommon species from the UK lakes dataset is just 13, so very nearly there. But how is the New Forest so exceptional? Well, because unlike elsewhere in lowland England, the New Forest still has clean water habitats free from pollution. And many species are completely reliant upon the traditional grazing and the depressions left by the free roaming livestock. And the dung as well. The dung is ever so important, providing a small amount of nutrients into the environment that invertebrates and plants can feed from. So these in combination provide the perfect conditions for a place that really is thriving with biodiversity and bursting with rare species. Oh, sorry. So this slide here just illustrates my point perfectly. The combination of clean, unpolluted waters and that intricate mix of grazing, whether it's from cattle or ponies or pigs or sheep, you know, the depressions that they leave in the ground, the way that they eat the vegetation really equates to an abundance of rare species. So just in this picture here, you can see in the foreground we have pillwort, we have marsh St John's wort, we have marsh pennywort, we have lesser spearwort. So lots of lovely New Forest rarities there that's just been chomped away at by this Highland coo here. So just for good measure, we have put New Forest water quality to the test. So in 2016, volunteers were exploring the forest with our clean water quick test kits to detect pollution and detect clean water bodies. And we were specifically looking for nitrates and phosphates. So here is a map of the results. So the blue dots represent the water bodies free of both nitrates and phosphate pollution, so completely clean water bodies. The green dots are those with signs of some pollution, and the red are those which are highly polluted. So the blue dots really do reflect the landscape. We know that the New Forest is made up of these semi-natural habitats such as the heathland, the woodland, with actually little human disturbance in comparison to the rest of the country. And these parts of the forest have been traditionally managed for hundreds of years, and have remained uncultivated with few settlements. However, around the edge of the forest is where there is more urbanisation, intensive agriculture, and you can see those green and red dots showing signs of pollution. So in total, we tested 675 water bodies. You can see the results just here. 74% were clean, 11% showed some pollution, and 15% were polluted. Now, we did the same thing not too far away in the Oxford catchment, and the results were stark in comparison. This really is a representation of the state of England's freshwater network. It's failing, and it's mainly failing for water quality. And if we take the water bodies tested that showed some signs of pollution, then we are looking at around 20% of the tested water that is at risk, which is a red flag for the New Forest, for what really should be a high quality landscape. So we do have some concerns, and there are pressures and problems that we do need to tackle. But at least it doesn't look like the Oxford catchment. Okay, so these red flags are also evident in the Environment Agency's monitoring. So the Environment Agency provides statutory monitoring, which is called the Water Framework Directive. The Environment Agency monitor further downstream than we normally do, and they are not detecting the high quality in the upper reaches of the catchment. So the small water bodies are left unmonitored by the statutory agencies. But what this does highlight is the deterioration of our well-known rivers within the New Forest catchment, and with many now actually failing to meet even good status and of what we know is a high quality landscape. So in total, we have 18 water bodies that are assessed by the EA. I mentioned earlier that there were 12 rivers. Well, some of these are actually split because they are longer, and they're split into 2 monitoring points. And of these 18 assessed water bodies, 15 failed to meet the minimum standards under ecological status, and only 3 meet the minimum, which is classified as good, with no water bodies reaching high status. Below you can see a summary table showing the reasons for not achieving good status, and this really is split between agriculture and rural land management and the urban environment, which is mainly down to road runoff and wastewater discharge. So what's going on in between? So we know that we have this pristine core at the heart of the forest, but as the water flows towards the sea, we can see an increase in deterioration. And what we have learnt from long-standing research is that freshwater biodiversity relies on clean, unpolluted water for its success. So just to kind of recap, what is actually impacting on water quality decline. So there are extreme issues with water quality as the water flows downstream from the core of the forest. The English countryside surrounding the New Forest looks idyllic, but virtually all of these freshwaters in this landscape are seriously polluted. And the reason for these failures are due to diffuse and point source pollution, coming from intensive agriculture, sewage, other discharges, urban areas, road runoff, and intensive recreational activities. But most of England's rivers and lakes are highly polluted with too many nutrients, heavy metals, pathogens, pesticides and sediments. And we can see the impact that this is having because the evidence is telling us that the extinction rates of freshwater species is 4 to 6 times higher than terrestrial counterparts. So for most freshwater habitats, it's impossible to recover undamaged status. We need to raise the profile of those small freshwater habitats and really put our efforts into protecting those and ensuring that deterioration goes no further. So what can we do about this locally? Well, in the New Forest, we have something called a catchment partnership. All the way back in 2012, DEFRA set out to tackle catchment management from the bottom up. So that really meant that stakeholders would lead initiatives to address issues in the catchment alongside the Environment Agency's priorities. So really working together closely there. So we were able to form a joint partnership, so Freshwater Habitats Trust and the New Forest National Park Authority, to join forces to form and establish a catchment partnership to look at what was really important in our area and what we can do to make a difference. And our vision, we have a very strong vision as a New Forest Catchment Partnership, and it's to recognise that we have the opportunity to protect and restore freshwater and coastal habitats to a very high standard. We have the footing there. We already have, a really high status landscape at the core. So there isn't any reason why we can't expand outwards and ensure that we can protect the core of the forest into the future. So we want to go further than the Water Framework Directive. We want to include monitoring the ponds, the small lakes, the headwater streams, the mires. They are important and they are what is, a national asset of freshwater biodiversity for this country. But we can't do this without raising the profile of what really matters, and that's raising awareness to seek and tackle issues of perception. So we need to move people's view from this, which is the lower half of the Lymington, a river neatly contained, suffering from huge pressures with no features really for wildlife, suffering from eutrophication, nutrient enrichment. And we need to help people to think more like this. Where is the river? The landscape is inundated with water, saturated ground, diversity of flows and depths, perfect for specialist wetland species. And of course, not forgetting fantastically important ponds. Not that it might look like one at the moment, but this pond hosts the ancient and rare tadpole shrimp that's still hanging on in the New Forest. And there's a little photo down there just so you know what an interesting creature it is. It's actually a crustacean. And this pond is clean, it's unpolluted, it's grazed, which provides the perfect condition for these species. And this tadpole shrimp is only found in one other location in the British Isles, and that's on the Solway Firth. So incredibly rare and a real window into the kind of the historic past. Possibly a species that's been stayed relatively unchanged since the dinosaur times. So yeah, just really, really important. So fortunately, we're not the only organisation that cares about protecting the forest. Over the past few years, really over the past 10 years, we have been working closely with the National Park and other stakeholders to seek opportunities to work collaboratively and to really start to address some of the pressures the forest faces. And over the past 18 months, FHT have been heavily involved in delivering and meeting the targets set out by DEFRA and the Green Recovery Challenge Fund to kickstart action to address the climate and nature emergency after the pandemic. We saw a lot of pressure on the forest after the pandemic. With the easing of the lockdown, the forest became very, very busy. So this funding came at such a critical time. So as an organisation locally, we've been working hard to raise awareness of the wonderful wetlands across the forest and ensure that this sort of activity is a thing of the past. We've got a long way to go yet, but Thea is going to give you a lovely run through of some of the work that we have been doing over the past 18 months, thanks to Environment Agency funding, the National Heritage Lottery Fund and DEFRA.
So we've been doing 2 bigger projects this year in the New Forest, both funded by the Green Recovery Challenge Fund. And the first of these is of one I've been taking the lead on called Wilder for Water. Wilder for Water has always been about engaging with people and trying to raise awareness of the special qualities of the New Forest wetlands, along with championing a best practice set of behaviours. So that is what you can see here in our New Forest Water Code. And we've got one side all about issues and ways that when you are visiting the New Forest, you can keep the New Forest water clean and wonderful for wildlife. And then the other side, we try to address disturbance issues. And these messages are all really positive messaging that people can take away an action. So leave no trace is going beyond just taking your litter home, but then also thinking about what waste we leave behind. So making sure that we actually use toilet facilities rather than New Forest, and actually taking away all pet waste, because pet waste can have a significant impact to the ecology as well as being not very nice to look at. And that goes on then to say about suitable facilities. So that's about thinking of our wastewater and not tipping even waste tap water onto the forest, because chemically they are really quite different. And the last message on that side is check, clean, dry, which is focusing on invasive species. And as you can imagine, with a large number of visitors to the New Forest from all over the country, there is the potential to bring a large number of different invasive species from lots of different areas. So the message there is to check your boots, any kit that you have, clean it, and then leave it to dry as long as possible to prevent the spread of pests, diseases, and invasive species. And then on the other side of our code, we have messages about disturbance. So that's doing the right activities in the right place. Paddle sports and swimming are not allowed everywhere. They are very much isolated to the coast, and there's still large amounts of the coast that are designated for conservation. So there's still sites on the coast where you have to think and be aware that they're not suitable for paddleboarding or swimming. And then another one is sticking to the pitch. So the New Forest is not suitable for wild camping and it's not permitted. So there are many campsites. It's one of the best campsited areas. So go to a campsite that has the suitable facilities to meet our needs. And the last one almost comes into those questions about disturbance and walking. And it's about staying on the track and keeping dogs under effective control. And being on the right track as well. So there's a difference between footpaths and byways, and it's again having that right activity in the right place. So this is the code that we've been promoting, and we've been promoting it through holding lots of different events. So we've been doing events big and small this year, directly engaging with the public, using activities like paper dragonfly making to draw in kids and families and engage with them about our messaging. These have been a mix of outreach, so that's been going out of the national park into Southampton or the Bournemouth edge, so we've done events in Ringwood and New Milton, which are on the edge of the forest, to get to those people who would regularly visit the New Forest or have access easily to our protected areas, and it is an area to recreate. And then also local events we've been going to, and we've been doing these and sometimes with partnership of other organisations, and some of the local events we've been doing have been focused at campsites where people are more likely to be visitors and potentially not have the whole depth of knowledge that other people would, but being there for a long period of time, like a week, it could have significant impacts on the New Forest. And then some of the other events we've been running have been to have that deeper engagement with people, and these have been focused at local communities as well as visitors to the New Forest. So we've been running monthly joint litter picks with the New Forest ambassadors. We've done some in partnership with New Forest activities, so you can see in the bottom picture there that we were actually on the water in kayaks, and you can see that we've been doing them in all seasons by the very frosty winter picture that's also there. And then we've also been running some guided walks, and these have really been showing people in person some of the wonderful species that the New Forest holds. And it's allowed us to listen to communities as well as share our visions, to hear about what people know and what people are concerned about in the New Forest. One of the things we have been running this year is a citizen science project called the Water Blitz. So if you think back to what Gemma was talking about earlier, we've repeated the water quality sampling across the whole New Forest landscape with our quick kits. And these are the results that we've had in so far. So this is about 600 results. And you can see that actually it is a very similar picture to 2016, where the centre and the core of the forest is all that lovely blue colour, signifying clean water. So 80% of the results that have been tested so far have come back at clean. And then you can see there's a lot more of that red and green colour at the edges of the New Forest. And there's also some within. And it's really showing that we have this potential, with clean water having the potential for really high biodiversity, being one of those key factors that controls the biodiversity in areas. So it's really promising, and it's a great way to engage with people. So we've engaged with over 160 volunteers doing this citizen science project, and it was really exciting. And I recognise some of the people's names in this talk as people who had volunteered as part of this, which is great to see. So what can you do? The whole purpose of this project is to get people taking away what they can do to keep our New Forest really full of these wonderful rare species that Gemma has already talked about. So it is leave no trace, taking your waste home, including dog waste, camping in campsites, not wild, knowing where to do different activities, staying on the paths to limit your disturbance, and coming with clean shoes and equipment. A really key way you can do this is just by planning your visit and paying attention to any signs that have been put up. So obviously there's seasonal changes in the New Forest, like ground nesting bird season, where it becomes even more important to stick to those tracks or even avoid certain areas because of the nesting curlew and lapwing that might be there. And invasive species are one of those issues that are particularly important for the New Forest because it is isolated and holds some of the rarities. And also with freshwater, streams can take up any seeds and then they can get a fast track to lots of different areas as they get transported by the water travelling over the land. So it is really important to try and follow these messages as we visit the New Forest. One of the other things that we've had going on currently actually is the New Forest Spawn Survey. So this is actually a national spawn survey. So it's run by our charity and we promote it all over England. And we simply ask anyone to report sightings of frog or toad spawn on our website. And it just gives us this wonderful national picture of what they are doing in terms of breeding. And we annually run it every single year. We have got up to, well, we've got 1,000 records nationally so far, but it's not over yet. we were talking before this meeting that lots of frogs are still actually breeding, even though it's quite late in their traditional breeding season. And there's lots of toad spawn still to find as well. So the other project that we've been running this year has been run by our colleague Angela Peters, and it's been focusing a lot more on the physical environment and working with landowners. So it has been looking to facilitate opportunities to expand the outstanding habitats and the new forest species in the freshwater landscape. The aims of the project were to improve habitats at 10 woodland sites with wetland features and to create or improve wetlands at 5 sites. It engages with volunteers, landowners and contractors, all in the ideas of conserving the freshwater landscape. So the range of work has been quite broad, from habitat improvement and restoration. So this has included invasive species controls, aiming to eradicate some invasive species that have a really dominating effect, taking over whole wide areas and outcompeting our native species that we look to care for. So Rhododendron ponticum has been one of these species that has been found in a lot of the woodlands and the wetlands, covering the ponds, edges and the whole area, stopping any light getting down and culturing some native wonderful ground level species. And then equally increasing the structural diversity in wet woodlands and wetland features in ponds and ditches. So this has been like removing some of the canopy to let light reach the ground of woodlands and increase the diversity going on in terms of light levels. And then water quality improvement works. So these have been channeling clean water away from farmyards to reduce the nutrient enrichment water running into the solent and into the ditches that carry the water. So it's separating clean and dirty water, putting covers on muck heaps, introducing rainwater collection tanks, guttering, and all of these sorts of ideas to think about where our water flows and what's actually being picked up by that water, and if we can reduce the nutrients that it holds in any way. And then the last bit of work that this project has been doing has been habitat creation. So actually the creation of a new pond in a wetland heath and a creation of a pond complex in a neutral acid meadow, small holding surrounded by designations. So when we say designations, we're talking about sites protected for wildlife in the south of the forest. So I thought we'd go into a couple of these bits of work in a bit more detail. So here are some of the site locations of the 15 that this project has been working in, and you can see here that they're in the edge of the forest near Lymington, and that they're actually really close to those sites of special scientific interest and sites for nature conservation. So at one of these sites there has been wetland creation, and this is in the wet meadow area. So wetland creation is quite a lengthy process, as it involves heavy engagement with the landowner and then working out the site suitability, developing plans about where is suitable for ponds, what the pond design and shape might be, and then submitting that to planning application as it is a major change on the landscape. So the planning had to be approved by the National Park Authority as it was within the National Park boundary. And then after the planning application comes through, it's then working with contractors, in this case, to actually put the ponds in the ground. So very skilled digger driver there, you can see carving with a toothed bucket into the topsoil and lower to create this pond. So the ponds that we created here were 3 in a little pond complex. They all have long, shallow drawdown zones and vary in shapes and depths. with uneven edges to really promote the highest biodiversity that we could get, as biodiversity thrives on there being variation. So it's really trying to make sure there's variation within even a small set of 3 ponds. There will be further managing to maintain these 3 ponds. So this site is a grazed site, and as Gemma was talking, grazing actually has a really important impact when it comes to managing different species all living together and cycling nutrients around an area without introducing new at a level that we would call nutrient pollution. So with the grazing, we look and we hope to come back and see some wonderful pond and wetland species colonising these ponds in the years to come. So that's the wetland work, and then the woodland work is all about increasing diversity within woodlands. So here you can see a very small spring flush going through, and where we've actually removed some trees, I think it's birch in this case, opening up the canopy and letting light down to that wetland area. So there's spring lines, flushes and ditches, all within different woodlands that we've tried to work around, doing quite a lot of invasive species management with contractors and volunteers, mainly removing rhododendron ponticum that smothers the woodland ground. And we've been cutting this, burning it on site where possible, and then treating the stumps so that it doesn't return. And the treatment and return management is a real key part to managing invasive species. And then also, as part of this, we've been doing some selective clearing of, so only selecting a small number of trees to remove and create variation in the woodland without dramatically changing it, just introducing some clearings. So this is what that site looks like the first summer after those clearing work has been done. And you can see that there's some wonderful wetland plants in there. So there's Lesser skullcap, there's ragged robin, and there's some watermint. And all of these are just lovely wetland plants. And just those 3 are a fraction of the biodiversity that's being held here. There's also been a number of dragonflies spotted here already this summer, last summer. So golden ring dragonflies were spotted here, and so were the common darter dragonflies. And with that clean water, it just has a huge potential after this work to keep getting more biodiverse. So that's all about those projects. If you've really enjoyed this and would want to stay connected and learn more about what Freshwater Habitats does in the New Forest and events we might be doing, you can follow us. So there's @Gemma Freshwater for Twitter, FHT New Forest is our name on Facebook and Instagram. And if you're not into social media, do check out our website. And on our website, you can sign up to our newsletter, which is our Catchment Partnership newsletter, where we talk about the work partners are doing as well as the work we are doing. And it's called the Water News. So that is all for our talk, and we'll stop again now for questions.